Welcome to the Undeniable Culture podcast, where we talk about we, the team at Undaunted Agency, discuss the business of creativity, culture, and what inspires us to be audaciously creative. I am Jonathan Menjivar-Lopez, CEO and brand strategist at Undaunted Agency.
I'm Ashton Edwards. I am the creative director.
And I am Myca Williamson, the account executive for Undaunted. And today we're going to be talking about DEI in design. And so first, we're going to kick this conversation off by just defining what DEI is. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in practice, it's really just about acknowledging a variety of cultures and identities and ideas and making sure everyone is represented in your business or within your design. So Ashton, since you are a creative director, I feel like you'd be a great person to kind of expand on this and talk about what DEI means when we talk about it in terms of design.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing that comes to everybody's mind is representation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like having imagery reflect the population, the demographic, and just be more accurate to reality. But what people don't think about is the equity side. Like that doesn't get as acknowledged as much. Like, how do we meet people where they are, what their needs are? What are their specific hurdles that are a barrier to them interacting with your product, brand, or service?
Right.
And that's where the challenge is figuring out specific demographics issues. I heard this one creative director speak about how they were trying to get more people registered to vote. So what they did is they figured out what are the challenges. And most of the people they were trying to get to vote were lower income. So they didn't have all this extra time and free time to run out and do these things. So they're like, well, where do these people spend their time? So they went to laundromats, they went to barbershops, they went to community centers, and they got people to sign up to vote there. And that is where equity comes in, is meeting people where they are, whether it's like income, disability, status, all these different things.
Mm-hmm.
Right. There's so many people who would use, a service or a product too if they were exposed to its benefits, in the right way too, right? Where it's like, yeah, we're trying to push a marketing agenda or something, right? But it can also be equitable and inclusive of what their experience is like.
Yeah.
And we kind of do that sometimes in marketing, where we kind of like are just like, hey, let's push this product, let's make this thing happen like this, and it's very narrow-minded sometimes. And it's sometimes just out of convenience. It's like the only thing you can do, or it's where the budget can go. And there's so much value and so much benefit into expanding that into other groups and other ways that would be a little bit outside of the box.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and I think about things like something just as simple as making sure like your website is like mobile responsive, right? So if somebody doesn't have access to a PC or a Mac or whatever to, see the desktop version. But like, what would be some of the other examples you guys would add to that in terms of like things that make the user experience more inclusive and equitable?
Well, we just recently did a website for a pediatric center. And so we really had to think about who was using this clinic and what their obstacles were. And one big feature for it was language toggling, being able to flip between English and Spanish so that they could be best served.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a key one. Language is such a large barrier for a lot of people. Like, I remember growing up and, being that my parents most of the time only speak Spanish, and my dad kind of speaks English sometimes, but still like complicated documents and conversations around, specific items is difficult. I was kind of like the 8-year-old translating for them on important government documents. And so I'm kind of like translating and I'm getting things done and stuff. And so like the more that critical information, being a nonprofit pediatric clinic is very important for them to be able to provide that information in both English and Spanish, because they have a very high Hispanic population. And, like you mentioned, their mobile responsiveness, they only see the internet on their phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it was not only not only it was both, right? Bringing both together, and that's a lot more complex website than say, a standard brochure website that just has 5 pages and here it is. Hey, there's some intentionality in making that happen, and I wish we could take the credit for it, but really, it was a client.
The client knew, yeah.
It was their vision. It was we're like, we have a need for this because we want to serve our clients better, is how they approached us to it. And we need a partner that can execute on it in a way that makes sense for our vision. And I think that's where we were able to step in and help.
Another note is that language. Again, for the pediatric place that we did the website for, they're like, not only is English can be a challenge sometimes, but education levels are a challenge. So we needed the language we use to be accessible to people at various language or English levels. Like, I think the aim was about 8th grade.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, is what they were looking for, so that someone could read it and understand it.
Yeah.
And moreover, designing it in such a way that all this information is digestible and absorbable and navigatable.
Right.
Because if someone doesn't use your critical website, then they're not going to get the service they need. And in the case of health, they may be missing something really important.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, these things are really quite simple to do, but a lot of people just forget to do them or don't realize how important they are. I was reading an article about like data visualization in DEI, and it was talking about just like the colors that you use, and it was kind of 2 parts. Like, one, like the colors that you use in terms of people's different like visual capabilities, but then it was also talking about like the things that we associate, with certain colors, and being mindful of what colors you use to, with a certain group of people or culture, things like that. And they were also talking about things like even icons, like, are your icons diverse and representative of, different groups of people? And so I think it's important, for us to continue sharing these things and learning about these things. But one of the big things for me is like, a lot of these things I've kind of stumbled upon, like across, through experience or, through other people telling me that they wish, this was, better because X, Y, Z. But what would you guys would say, like, are some of the places that you've like learned about, some of these things, just so that we can continue to hold ourselves accountable?
Oh, I wish I could tell you there's like a plethora of resources, but a lot of them are kind of stale and not as helpful as I'd like. One of the places I get this information personally from is AIGA, which is an association for designers, advertisers. They have content that they release around a myriad of subjects, and that's one of them. And honestly, just speaking to my peers as well, because a lot of people in our field care about these issues, and moreover, it's a part of our job to make sure that people can interact with our designs properly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of my information comes from YouTube. I love YouTube. I have YouTube for my TV, and I'm just flipping through things like consistently. But there's so many outlets that are producing so many like analyses and educational content on YouTube that it's really like a great resource for that information. The thing that I would say about it is you need to have a diverse perspective. Your information gathering method needs to have diversity in it as well.
Yeah.
It needs to be not from the same place and not from a person or just people that think like you do. So like if I watch a video and then it's about, a certain topic about how this thing happened, then I try to find the same video with somebody who has a slightly different perspective on it. And just seeing it from multiple angles, even if it's kind of like a lot of the same stuff, like it feels like it's like you're watching a lot of similarities, those variances are really what I'm looking for to get a better perspective on a topic.
Yeah.
Understanding.
It's funny that you say that because there's a lot of research now, especially in fields like psychiatry, where no one else could participate in the conversation because of systematic issues.
Right.
So they're looking at these early studies and realizing, oh, this doesn't actually apply to the whole population.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's another thing is you always have to be challenging your biases.
Right.
Because just because that's what we always thought doesn't make it true.
I think a really good way to do that as well, and it might seem kind of simple, but it's just like exposing ourselves to new experiences just to see how things are done differently, right? So it's like, if even from whether that's a cultural standpoint or, like my stepbrother has autism. And so there's a lot of things that I didn't know about, folks with disabilities that I'm like hyper aware of now because I have, a family member and, there's a lot of like programming and things that we had put him in. And so I think it's about intentionally exposing yourself to those things too, so that you can be, a voice or an advocate in, those decision-making spaces.
Yeah, if you are a person that has the privilege to be in decision-making spaces, you have like a responsibility to do that to your best of your ability and to constantly be challenging those aspects about yourself. Like, I've got some stuff to unpack. If you haven't thought that, then you should probably start thinking it.
Yeah, so I guess another question I have for you guys is like, how do you see what role do you see, a positive role do you see DEI having for business and creativity in general?
I mean, there's so many things. I think DEI just leads to if I'm working at a company and they're treating me and my peers with respect and consideration and being not just reactive but proactive about these things, I'm going to be happier working there. Even if from my simplest jobs, like very early on to now as a creative director, that's always been true. As a very bare minimum, it just makes life better for people.
I think for us, especially as communicators, as people who are building assets that people are going to, derive information from, it's critical for marketing and the marketing communications teams to have these conversations and to be advocates for making decisions about that information that are, that keep DEI in mind.
Yeah.
And that makes it a little bit difficult for us because there's some awkward conversations that you have to have.
Yeah.
You have to be the person in the room that's like, hey, these things aren't representative of what our population is for, who we're serving. And,
right.
The more we stray away from who we're serving, the less impact we're going to be able to have in that community and the less impact we're going to have at large.
Yeah.
And that I've had a few of those conversations where it's really awkward.
Yeah.
You have to be honest and open, and you get like, I know that this may not have been an intentional decision. There's different things that come into play when we're making assets and visual elements and copy and stuff, but it's something that, as long as somebody's asking, and primarily it is the marketing team putting that information out there.
Yeah. And I think,
I'm sorry.
No.
I just was going to say it's worth noting that sometimes you fail. Like, you can say the right things and speak up for people and ask for better. And sometimes it doesn't happen, but that doesn't mean you need to stop.
Right.
Definitely some of my early experiences in my career that happened. It was really disappointing because, I was like, wow, I thought we were better than this.
Right.
But, making people see the value in what you're doing, both internally for humans, but also for profit, because at the end of the day, these people are in a business.
Right.
Yeah.
How can you angle that so that you're able to get that message across?
Right.
Yeah.
I think a key thing to always keep in mind too is that there's DEI elements that people bring into their messages, into their brands, into their environments, and it's sometimes performative in nature.
Yeah.
Which is a term I learned at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I knew it a little bit, but I had somebody like I was networking with, and they were talking about how they were keeping brands accountable to certain things, and I asked, how do you make sure that they're not, being, performative in nature, and they were like, you call them out. You have to call it out. You have to say, hey, it's, you're doing this great, but you're doing it not to uphold something long term. It's more to look good, right? And that's another difficult conversation to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the thing that's happening now is that, companies are starting to see that DEI really does affect your bottom line,
Right there.
right? Like, if I don't have enough people, it gives me a competitive edge to have a wide variety of thinkers,
Yeah.
And so, to your point, there are some people that are just thinking about it from that perspective only. Like, this is going to help us win. This, will increase our revenue, whatever.
Right.
And so while it does give opportunity to, a variety of people, it is performative in nature in that the intent behind it is not pure. So that is tough, but I think it is a motivating factor, at least to get things done. Because it's like, I just think about, can't remember which designer it was. I want to say it was Gucci, but I think, there was somebody on their team that approved an incredibly like racist campaign and a product. And so it was like, if you had somebody, in the room that was like, I don't think you guys should do that, that probably would have saved them, a lot of money. And so to your point about things being performative, it's kind of hard nowadays because it's like you want to see the change, but you don't always know if the intent behind it is pure.
Let me ask you, right? In that particular instance, right? I've heard a lot of different instances where that's the core thing. Like, if there was somebody in the room that understood culturally what that meant for that culture, this wouldn't have happened. And do you think that it's an issue of like there's not a person in that room, or do you think that it's like they're maybe not, they don't have a voice in the decision making process to say like, hey, let me bring this up because I think it's not gonna play out.
Like a role that focuses on that?
No, not necessarily. I mean, like, in our agency, like, we give everybody the ability to speak up.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah.
a concern with something that we're producing, like, and we're a small team, so it's like, not that difficult. But in a bigger organization, there's like hierarchical hierarchies.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of data that talks about DI initiatives and like how effective they really are in terms of like where you are on the food chain or in the hierarchy, right? Like, there's a more diverse representation of like the people down here, but when we start getting to like VPs or like C-suite people, that's when it starts to And so to your point, like they might say 60% of our workforce is considered diverse or whatever, but in terms of like who our decision makers are, our C-suite people, I would argue that a lot of times those numbers look very, very different. And so I would say, like they might be a part of like the overall infrastructure, but do they have, the power or the authority to influence decisions? Probably not.
Right.
Now, and when you publish a book, they have to go through a process called sensitivity screening to make sure that whatever they put in that book isn't problematic. Any publishing company worth their salt does that. Right. So where's that accountability for other brands
right?
Because it's possible, even on a large scale, if you make that a priority.
Yeah.
And I think it's a structure question.
Yeah.
It's like, even if you don't have like the decision-making authority, I feel like it's like you should at least have the ability to raise that concern and sound an alarm that says, hey, that's an issue, and here's why, and here's why I think it should be different. Now, if somebody brings it up and they make a decision otherwise, then it just means that they're not. Culture is not based on teamwork; it's more based on like getting it done because I'm the boss.
And I think that's the difference between performative and actual. Like, if you really care about these initiatives, then you have a system to react and to deal with and to listen to people.
Yeah.
It's not just something you're saying. It's a core element of your culture.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should take a look at some of the numbers around this particular topic. So one of the things that we found was a study done by Microsoft, and the research found that an inclusive ad drove a 23-point lift in purchase intent. And I thought this was interesting. And this is whether the person experiencing the ad was personally represented in the ad or not. So would you guys say that this is like the case for you? Like if you see, a brand showing appreciation or representing other cultures, ideas, identities, even if it's not your own, do you still feel more drawn to the brand? Or what brands, do you feel like you've seen do that really well that, you might be a supporter of?
For me personally, anytime I see something that looks very human, I react to it better. And the reality that we live in looks very different.
Yeah.
There's a lot more going on than just one type of person, right? And when I see a brand take the initiative to change the status quo, I get really excited. For example, and this is a very nerdy example, but Magic the Gathering just came out with cards that have Lord of the Rings characters on them. Aragon and Arwen, if I said it wrong, I'm sorry. But he is black now in this card. And there was some people are very angry. And then there are men reacting to this card art and saying, I have been a Tolkien fan for so long. And they're crying, live, well, not live, but on TikToks and in reaction videos because they've never seen themselves in this light. And I don't care if you're mad about it. This is making a positive impact on people's lives.
Right.
Because that's the reality of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, for me, there's elements that I'm like, I would like to see more, a Hispanic community and a Latin community represented. And I'm like, okay, cool. Especially recently, Pedro Pascal and Michael Pena and stuff. And I'm like, oh man, they're big actors.
Yeah.
Doing some
or the little
stuff.
boy from Encanto.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just amazing stuff that I'm really proud of. And it's just like, oh, this is cool that that people. For me, what I find too is I'm really excited about people able to experience my culture elements that would be just unique to that culture, right?
Yeah.
My friend sent over to me and my wife meme, and it was it was a dog that it looked like Pedro Pascal, and it was like Pedro Pascal, and my wife looked at me and she was like, "Why is this funny?" And it's like, well, a lot of Hispanic families, especially have you heard my dad call our dog? He's always like, pss, pss, pss. And he's always doing that. And that's why it's funny, right? And then she was like, oh, that is funny. I do hear him say that all the time. And so, you get to share those moments with more people.
Yeah.
They relate with it and they're happy to interact with our culture that way.
Yeah, and I think you've seen that a lot in media. There's a lot more kids movies that are coming out from different cultural perspectives.
Oh, yeah. I think Disney has done an incredible job with some of their
more
latest. Yeah. Oh, my gosh. I love, what's the Coco?
Oh, Coco is so very, that is yeah.
Yeah. Just.
And I guess a difficult question I have for you all. I think there's a concern that, in the efforts of doing DEI, that everything that was known and true and whatever has to change to be DEI, right? And I don't see it that way. I see a more value in newer stories being created that are diverse instead of the stories that are already been told being converted into that DEI.
Or just a reimagining. Do you know how many Spider-Mans there have been? Hundreds.
Right.
Yeah. There's so many universes, so many versions.
Yeah.
In Doctor Who, the guy literally creates a new version of himself every time, but people got mad when they were the woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel especially in the world of fantasy, you have license to explore that.
Right.
Let Little Mermaid be whoever fits the role the best. So let's explore that and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's reimagining.
Yeah.
Reanimating the movie. Or,
not going back.
Yeah. You're exploring something different, right? And that's different. And yeah, I mean, Miles Morales' Spider-Man, it's great. And I want to see that on the big screen. I was like, if Sony just made Miles Morales Spider-Man movies, and then the MCU also made Spider-Man movies, and they came out like a week apart, I would watch both of them.
Yeah.
They would have double the money.
They would.
And
It's a crossover I need to happen.
Yeah.
It'd have double the money for me. So, like, there's room for both.
Yeah.
I mean, I am, and this, I do have a little bit of inner rebel, but I do think there is a world where sometimes the status quo or like tradition, right, does need to be, it need to be poked at a little bit, because when we look at, history, or at least like the history we've been told, a lot of it is either not inclusive or honestly just downright untrue.
Right?
And so, and so much of our like society and institutions are based on that. And so I think, to your point, like, it is difficult, right? I think in general, a lot of us are pretty resistant to change because it's uncomfortable. It requires us to like stretch ourselves or learn something new, or maybe do something that's hard. And so I do think while we should allow iterations and, things to be reimagined, I do think there are some things that we have to acknowledge that they may not have a positive place in today's society. And so, definitely it's important, like I said, to acknowledge and learn about these things. But I think there is a world where we do have to remove some of those institutions and traditions to make sure that everyone does feel seen and included.
Right.
Yeah, it's Women's History Month, so while we're at the time of recording, yes, and every, I just remember coming out of high school and never hearing any history about women ever. Like, there's a couple sprinkled in,
Right?
Yeah, but then there are so many amazing women throughout history, breaking barriers, being badasses. But sometimes their names are buried. Sometimes they had to pretend a man to do it. Like, there was this one woman who wanted to be a doctor, so she pretended to be a man so she could be a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't come out till much later.
Yeah.
So it's just like, there are so many people in history because of religion, because of other bigotries, basically, that it's not only that they not have a voice, that they've literally been ripped out of history.
Yeah.
And so, we have to reconstruct that. We have to reintroduce those stories.
Yeah.
To tell the full and accurate story.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
I'll never forget the time a guy my friend was dating said, if women are so awesome, he literally said this, if women are so awesome, why aren't they the best at all the things?
Oh, bro. Goodness.
And he meant like the best scientist, the best whatever, and the best. I was so livid.
Triggering.
It was. And I was like, because you've been fed the wrong history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the end. A lot of the things that, are around DEI, it's misinformation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have the right details about it. And it might be because somebody gave you the wrong information. And it might be because somebody didn't give you the opportunity to experience that.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Mhm.
like it's I don't want to say it's not their fault, but because you can educate yourself, you can find out what the things are.
Yeah.
But it's systematic.
Yeah. It's part of the system.
Yeah.
So the only way we're going to overcome that is being active and participatory in the solution, which is where DEI stemmed.
Yeah. Well, and I think that really brings us to kind of our last kind of topic of this conversation around like what we can do. Because I found a statistic through Capterra, and it basically said like 50% of people in our industry of marketers don't realize that there's actually a federal law mandating that websites be like safe and accessible for all people, especially like people with disabilities. And so I just think about things like that, like 50%. So that means we're living in a world where half of, the marketing materials and collateral and things are not designed for, people with disabilities or for, any other group of people. So as we round out this conversation, what do you guys think that we can do on our end and, in terms of holding our industry colleagues accountable to make DEI a must-have or a necessary instead of a nice-to-have?
Yeah. I mean, I think as the experts that our clients are coming to solve their specific problem, we have that answer.
Yeah.
They don't even know to ask the question sometimes. Sometimes they do.
Right.
But I think that now that we've learned, because there are things we didn't know, we have the responsibility to do the research and to say, hey, we can make your brand have an impact even greater than what you were expecting.
Yeah.
So I think it's conversations and research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Giving people that opportunity to engage with those conversations is the biggest thing that we can provide, right? Is bringing the idea to the table. And one of the things that we learned in our conference experience was ideas are fragile, and it's you come up with it and you put it out there, and then one thing can break it.
Right.
Yeah, just one no can break it. But if you consistently bring it up and consistently bring up new ideas that are around this topic, then something's gonna break through eventually, right? So that's one component of it. I think another one, and I think it parallels really well into how brands can do this, can be inclusive, can have that diversity, can be equitable, but also it impacts their bottom line.
Right.
My wife and I have a lot of conversations around it's awesome that these organizations want to do good, but they're not going to do it unless it's going to bring a secondary benefit to the bottom line as well. At least the way capitalism works now.
Yeah. And it does, it adds to employee retention. It makes people have more faith and trust in their brand. There's a lot of business reasons beyond the human reasons, right?
Right. One component of that too is we've talked previously on another podcast episode about how we're moving more into an answer-based model instead of a search model for how people are surfing the internet. And we've already seen a lot of that in how we interact with Google Home and Siri, right?
Yeah, right.
We're not asking it to search something, we're asking it a question so that it gives us an answer.
Right.
That's the way we're getting information now. And that means that the content on your webpage and the content on the website or the blog has to be written in a way that is going to be able to provide an answer if it's called in that way.
Right.
And that not only helps us while we're interacting voice, in that way with Siri and Google Home, but also how people with vision that are
impaired.
How they are gonna get that content as well. What the alternative text underneath an image says and how it's gonna describe that image.
Family with addiction enabled.
Because it's the only way they can experience it.
Right.
I think overall, in a nutshell, I think the biggest thing is, especially for us, I think we have a personal responsibility as our own brand is to continue to model what, DEI in practice looks like, and like you said, continue to educate our clients, even when they don't know that that's something that they, might need a solution for. So I'm really excited that we got a chance to have this conversation, and we hope that you guys will continue this conversation with us by sharing your favorite moments using the hashtag #AudaciouslyCreative.
Until next time.
Until next time.